you all so much for joining this afternoon. Fantastic to have such a full room to discuss demographic dilemmas across the UK. And fantastic to be joined by this excellent panel who I'll introduce shortly. My name is Rachel Statham. I'm Associate Director for Work and Welfare State at IPPR, the Institute for Public Policy Research. And we're really delighted to be with the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries here today, represented by their banner, but also by Stuart on my right, who are sponsoring this event. So I'll give a fairly brief overview of what we'll be talking about. But as you might have seen, we've read the kind of introduction to this event. We're going to take quite a broad look at our ageing population across the UK, some of the policy challenges that throws up, from healthcare to social care, to fiscal challenges, and to the questions about what a good later life might look like and how we can make sure that fewer people lose out on that opportunity. So as you'll likely know, the UK has a rapidly ageing population. People aged 65 and over are forecast to make up 24% of the population by 2043, so that will be 17.4 million people. Support for older people in many areas is already stretched, as many of you will know from your day-to-day lives. And the growth in our older population is likely to have further significant impacts on vital services. Now, in the current context we're in, the cost of living crisis is posing immediate challenges for older people. Some of our work at IPPR with the Centre for Ageing Better has looked at the challenges older people face with regards to their financial security, and we know that a lot of those challenges are intensifying. And what we're concerned about and what we'll be discussing today is how we can make sure that good later life is in the grasp of more people. So we'll speak, I'm sure, to some of the more recent policy developments, from the state pension age review to the triple lock question, to the state of health and social care, and much more, I'm sure. But I will stop there and introduce our panel, who will give a really interesting range of perspectives, I think, to this set of challenges that we're ready to explore today. So to my left, we have John, who is an Alzheimer's campaigner. And John will be speaking first. So John Teeling was diagnosed with young onset Alzheimer's disease in 2014, and he'll be speaking to his experience of diagnosis and the campaigning work that he's done. Next to John we have Camilla Cavendish, who is a Financial Times columnist, former head of the Number 10 policy unit, and has been recently writing a book, or back in 2019, but it feels recent given pandemic context, that's called Extra Time, 10 Lessons for an Ageing World. And amongst her kind of many roles and hats that she wears, she can speak to her kind of lessons on how we deal with an ageing population. To my right, we have Samuel Kasumu, former special advisor to Boris Johnson, elected councillor, similarly wears lots and lots of hats, but we're speaking with a variety of those on today. Also a new candidate for Mayor of London, I understand, having a particularly busy day today. And then to my far right, we have Stuart McDonald, head of demographic ageing assumptions and methodology at Lloyds Banking Group, though I think, Stuart, you might have just or be shortly changing roles.
The process of moving, yeah.
Fantastic. To the LCP partnership to develop their longevity expertise. And as I mentioned, Stuart is also representing the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries today. So a really wide range of expertise to get us started. So I'll now move us on to my kind of first set of questions as chair. And then we'll be opening up to questions from the audience. So please do keep your questions in mind as we're speaking. We won't, I promise, hog all the time for my questions. And really excited to hear from you in the audience too. So we'll have a few minutes for each speaker to introduce themselves before those first set of questions. So I'll hand first over to John.
Hello, my name's John Teeling. You'll have to excuse me because I only read off notes. I've been invited to talk about my experience and perspectives on receiving my diagnosis of Alzheimer's. As our population gets older, there'll be 2 million people living with dementia by 2040. So it's really important that we improve detection and dementia care, or to use the catch-all phrase for mental and brain malfunction, dementia. I hope this will result in a better experience for all of us who receive this life-changing news. First of all, a bit of background about me. I was a mechanical design engineer, when there was a shrinking amount of work available at the end of my working life. This led me being made redundant 3 or 4 times over the last 5 or 6 years of my working life, unsettling me, my wife and my children. My family noticed me, or took the brunt of me, being snappy, dogmatic, less empathetic, which was accompanied by mood swings. We put down to a little bit of depression. My wife first mentioned this to a doctor in about 1989. I believe that this unfortunately is so often the case, is that it is only when people have a crisis, as it turned out for me, that things are set in motion. This delay resulting in unnecessary expense, worry and stress. However, one morning in 2014 I blacked out, resulting in me being taken for a brain scan. When my GP saw the results, he sent me to the memory clinic. It transpired that part of my brain was dead. While at the clinic, I was tested by conversational and written tests 3 or 4 separate times. The last time I was there, my wife and my daughter were with me. We were informed that I had early onset Alzheimer's. He said it as gently as a doctor can and added that a nurse will be in touch about my medication, as it was very strong and he needed to know if I was suitable. He may have asked if we had any questions relating to my condition, but I was so shocked and asked few, if any, of any consequence. Well, that was the medical side, delivered only as a doctor can, but it left me, my wife and my daughter with many unanswered questions, such as how quickly will I deteriorate and what is available in the way of help, as my wife is blind. I mean, when told of the condition you have, your mind goes to the worst case scenario. The nurse, when she came, after about 6 to 8 weeks later, was there to tell me about the medication I was to take and how to take it. Her knowledge on the support and social side and help available to us was, I take it, only general knowledge. In other words, not her area of expertise. However, she did recommend the Alzheimer's Society to us and to get in touch with them. Whether this was part of her job or it came out of the conversation with us, I don't know. That the time frame from when the doctor referred me and the nurse coming was about 8 or 10 weeks, give or take. And after notifying Alzheimer's, only 2 weeks before somebody arrived. So 10 to 12 weeks, far too long, leading to unnecessary stress and worry. I mean stress and worry, not only for myself, but for my family as well. When somebody arrived from the society, we were able to put everything in perspective. She said we get in touch with social services to see what help we were entitled to, which turned out to be none. But she also said get in touch with Singing for the Brain and other organisations which help me keep my brain, which is important, keep it working. She was also the one who advised us about planning for the future, arranging things like power for attorney, both social and financial. This is so important for a settled mind. My daughter commented that she thought that the diagnosis sent us into a process similar to bereavement, that is, denial, acceptance, grief, etc. Although the importance of the diagnosis allowed for earlier medical intervention, not a cure, but a slowdown of its progress. It also allowed us to understand my behaviour to my family and friends and why I was as I was. So, could the experience of being told my condition have been better? Yes. The time frame from being informed of my condition to obtaining knowledge to act on and where it is available to us was far too long, stressful again and worrying. But importantly, I realised we have to be in a mindset in order to receive the information. That the intersection between social and medical care is far too slow, leading to added stress and worry. That the two areas of medical and social care have to be closer, under the same roof if possible, as it is in Manchester. I believe that this has been promised by this government. However, as with all governments, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. We also need to be told that we're not on our own, that there is help out there and where to get it. And that you have knowledge now, you've been told you've got it, so use it. So, what did I learn in my journey? Time is of the essence. The interpolation of medical and social services need to be closer and under one roof or authority, like I said, as it is in Manchester. That concern for the patient is evident, but knowledge of what happens to the patient before they arrive in front of you and what happens after they leave you needs to be appreciated. That the journey needs to be looked at in a holistic way, not just the part that you deal with. By contrast, my experience of being told I had cancer was far better. Here, the doctor, when he told me I had it, had a Macmillan nurse immediately on hand to answer both medical and social benefits which were available to us, and a CD of the session for future reference, because you can't take it all in. So the gap between social and medical services need to be intertwined and not two autonomous areas, this enabling any stress, time and worry to be kept to a minimum. I think I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I'll hand over next to Camilla.
Well, it's quite hard to follow that, John. I mean, I don't know really what to say. I mean, I feel like you've sort of stolen the show, and you've told your story brilliantly. And I have an aunt with Alzheimer's for whom I have power of attorney at the moment, and my mother had vascular dementia, and actually she did get, I don't know if it's the same medication that you're on, but she did get medication which people don't know about, which did actually prolong her quality of life.
You
There's
have
no
to
doubt about it.
dementia is like cancer. Cancer's got different types of cancer. Dementia's got different types of dementia, and obviously different medicines.
Yeah, and I think there is one of the things that I was reflecting about when you were speaking is we all have this deep fear of dementia, actually. It's something that people really worry about getting old. I mean, when you talk to people about getting old, and when I wrote my book, I went to 8 different countries to sort of find out what was going on, and actually not what governments were doing, because governments, in my view, don't fix this stuff on the whole. It's ordinary people coming together, and the kind of ecology of the system that you were starting to describe. So you mentioned Singing for the Brain. You mentioned the Alzheimer's Society. I mean, there is a whole ecology in all the countries I've been to, actually, of individuals and charities and organisations which are coming together to try and provide the infrastructure that we need. Governments are just way behind the curve, I think, on this. And well, it is political. It's also, I mean, I, for my sins, wrote a report, in fact, for Boris Johnson towards the end of the pandemic on the integration of health and social care, which he was very reluctant to publish for about a year, then put out under the radar, but it doesn't really matter. And I'm talking about that somewhere else tomorrow. But I mean, it is quite difficult to put them together. But you've articulated exactly why we need to put them together. And I mean, I'm kind of going to rip up what I was going to say and just address this really, because and you mentioned Macmillan nurses, John, and the contrast between dementia and cancer, and there are whole questions, of course, about funding. And a lot of people, you get to this stage of life and you're suddenly in an emergency. I mean, it doesn't have to be dementia. It can be all sorts of things. Families go into crisis. They can't discharge someone from hospital. They can't go home. And all this stuff. People assume it's going to be free. We all assume it's going to be on the NHS, and of course it's not. And actually the truth is we probably can't afford for it all to be on NHS. And there are very, very big questions about how we do that. But there's also just questions about how we explain to people. And I do think, unfortunately, the political classes for many, many years have not been open with people, really, about this cliff edge. And actually that you might have to plan for it and think about it, and it's not something any of us want to think about. But living wills and power of attorney and all those things that you've talked about are really, really important. Just tell a story, actually, from Holland. So, as I said, I went to various different countries. There's an amazing system in Holland called Buurtzorg, which was set up by a nurse who was fed up with the way the system failed people, rather similar to what we were like about 20 years ago. He was absolutely fed up with the kind of transactional nature of healthcare and the lack of caring for people at home. And he has set up a system which is really the same, it's the equivalent of our what we call domiciliary care in England, people who go into your house and help you remain independent. And what is brilliant about that, and is different to the systems that we tend to have here, is that it's qualified nurses who decide how much help you need. It's not decided by the state, it's not decided by some faceless regulator, it's decided by the people on the ground, and you only ever see 3 people in that team. You don't have a shifting cast of 100 characters who come in and out of your life, which is very, very upsetting if you have early stage dementia especially. It's very difficult to deal with. They have a real continuity, and nobody ever believes me when I say this, but it's actually saved money. It's saved money and it's improved, and I can see somebody nodding. Thank you. It's improved patient outcomes because people feel trust. They feel safe. They feel confident in the system. Funnily enough, they ring their equivalent of 999 less often. They wait for the woman I went round with, who was absolutely amazing, Joanne. They wait for her to come because they know she's coming on Wednesday, and they can wait for that. And honestly, the relationships that are built through that organisation, which now treats over 1 million patients in the Netherlands, and the relationships that they build with the friends and family around the people are very important, because I think in this country we still it's very siloed. You know, the state does this to us, and the state's not very good at involving other people. Sorry, I've gone. That's not addressing all the questions that you raised, Rachel. But
Yeah.
should we leave that for a minute?
We'll have time to get into other angles. Thank you very much, Camilla. I'll turn next to you.
Thank you. Good. Is it morning, afternoon?
Afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's been a long day. Can I just say, John, your words were deeply moving to me, and this idea of the power of planning is something that, for the future, it's something that I think we don't speak about enough. Not even just in this context, but in a broader context when it comes to things like access to financial products, particularly for people from underrepresented backgrounds. There's a huge amount of work that needs to be done, and unfortunately the pandemic has exacerbated some of the challenges of not being prepared. And also, you know, completely agree with Camilla's words, and just to emphasize the role of civil society cannot be lost in this conversation. When I was at Number 10, I was partly responsible for our civil society strategy, the good parts, and so I recognise that there is an important role to play here. So, you know, it is a truth universally acknowledged that not just in the UK but in many countries in Europe, we have a ticking time bomb, which is our ageing populations. Europe is leading in the proportion of the elderly population with 19%, followed by North America at 17%. And as Rachel alluded to earlier, that figure for us in the UK is due to rise to 24% by 2043. That's 17.4 million people. So we are living longer and have access to better medical care, which inevitably means that the costs of looking after our elderly will continue to rise. What makes Britain sort of unique is also that culturally, somehow, we've managed to get to a position where families do not always inherently look after their elderly. And I don't want to offend anyone in the room, but unfortunately, I'm a very direct individual, which is why I belong behind the scenes and not in front. So instead, we use private care if we can afford to, but more often than not, we expect the state to play a role. And now, it is not my place as a freedom-loving conservative to dictate or define how we should seek to redress this cultural variable that inevitably contributes to the challenge of how we look after our elderly in a sustainable way. But I think it's worth exploring if there are ways that we could perhaps nudge people to play a more significant role. Are there council tax incentives that could inspire the building of more granny annexes where there is space to do so, ensuring an elderly person does not have to live alone or spend the latter parts of their lives far away from their loved ones? Could we find ways to unlock pensions and inheritance in a way that gives a future tax incentive for people to utilize their assets whilst alive? Can we nudge people that are still living in homes that are designed for large families despite their children being long departed? The sad thing for me is that these are big questions that require imagination, which Albert Einstein once famously said is more powerful than knowledge. In the 2017 general election, Theresa May attempted to use her imagination on this subject, and we all know how that famously ended. As someone with a seat at the table during the formulation of the 2019 election, I can tell you that only the most courageous, and some would argue the slightly crazy people, would consider attempting to deal with this question creatively and decisively in a manifesto following what happened in 2017. Which leaves us in a strange place. We need bold, radical ideas, but that is unlikely to come in the place where governments are given the mandate to be radical, which is of course within the manifesto. And as we've seen in the last week, we try to be bold and radical, there is a debate around whether or not you have a mandate. Life becomes quite challenging. So I'm not sure how you square that circle. I think my final reflection for now is that we need to look at the life of an elderly person holistically. We know that loneliness is a big challenge and that many people are retired but still have a unique contribution to make to society. We can't stuff them all of our elderly in the House of Lords. But we can see if we can utilize their skills in other places. I have benefited greatly as a local councillor from the wisdom of those people who have slightly more time in their hands, and so can contribute significantly to public life. And so I'm going to pause there and say I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you very much, Samuel. And I'll turn finally to Stuart.
Thank you, and thanks all for your comments. Particularly, it was good to hear John kick us off with your personal story, and with causes of death changing, with the incredible progress we've made in tackling cardiovascular diseases, heart diseases at younger ages, and the headway we're making against cancer. Stories of dementia and Alzheimer's will become all the more common. I mean, this is something that awaits a great many of us. It's good to have an opportunity to talk to you today about this important topic on behalf of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. So as some of you might know, actuaries estimate the probability of risks and financial impacts of future events. So I think we do have a relevant perspective on these discussions. The IFOA, the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, is our professional membership body, and its purpose is to be the voice of actuaries and to support and develop its 30,000 members around the world, and to regulate the actuarial profession in the public interest, holding the members to high standards. In 2020, the IFOA published our Great Risk Transfer report. So this highlighted a systematic transfer of risk from institutions, so the state, employers and so on, to individuals. And that transfer has been happening across a number of dimensions over recent decades. So evidence of this shift exists in lots of areas of public policy, and it's a profound change in the way that individuals organise their life and their finances. Represents one of the most significant and yet little understood social, financial and political challenges of our time. Individuals are completely ill-equipped to manage these risks, both in terms of their finances, but also in respect of their numeracy, financial literacy and understanding. I'm going to mostly focus on pensions. I'm glad to see others haven't really so far. It's almost like we planned it. So decumulation of pension savings in retirement has been called the nastiest, hardest problem in finance. People don't know their life expectancy, so they don't know how long they need to eke out their funds for. And research has consistently shown that they typically underestimate life expectancy by several years. Even if you know your life expectancy, it's of little help. That statistic only really works as an average when you're dealing with a large group of people. I calculate life expectancy for a living, so I know what the ONS would tell me, that as a 45-year-old male, I've got about 39 years left. But there's a 1 in 4 chance that I live an extra decade beyond that life expectancy. So if I plan a strategy based on the averages, then there's a really significant chance that I run out of money in retirement. And of course, all that depends on having enough saved in the first place to be able to plan a retirement. Current auto-enrollment contribution levels are insufficient for most to have the sort of retirement they expect. Generation X look like they're going to experience a significant decline in living standards in retirement compared to what they had while working and to what their parents had while they were in retirement. And that's going to have impacts on society and on the economy. For most of us, the state pension is by far the largest part of our pension provision. So questions like the state pension age review and the triple lock are of great relevance. It's clear that state pension age needs to respond to changes in longevity, but arguably we waited too long to increase it above age 65. But changes do need to be managed with great care, keeping in mind that increases to the state pension age are regressive. We've got large differences in life expectancy between the richest and the poorest, and also that late career workers may be unable to plan for changes. When we're thinking about the state pension, we need to take into account the most recent life expectancy data. So improvements in life expectancy started slowing significantly in around 2011, and COVID has obviously had a profound impact in recent years. We don't yet know what that will do to life expectancy in the future, but it is likely to be a significant drag both on life expectancy gains and on the government's stated objective to narrow the gap between rich and poor. We're seeing increasing economic activity now in those in their 50s and 60s at a time when there's a significant shortage of workers, and some of that may well be due to long COVID and the significant increases in NHS waiting lists that we've seen in recent years. So My conclusions, the IFOA believes there's a need to rebalance risks back towards institutions, such as employers and the states. This may well require structural changes to markets and regulation. Consumers need to be given more help to manage the myth of choice, particularly choices that they're not well equipped to make, such as decumulation of pension savings. And we completely acknowledge the current cost of living challenges, but nonetheless would recommend that government reinvigorate public messaging around minimum pension savings so that consumers are not lulled into a false sense of security about pension adequacy.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
Can I just say, I mean, I totally agree with everything you said, and I'll read your report, because we absolutely have just transferred risk that people are completely, all of us are completely incapable of navigating, because we have no idea. But one of the things that really worries me is the difference in healthy life expectancy, not just life expectancy, but healthy life expectancy. If you look in the States, especially, and the UK, we now have gaps in double digits of how long the rich can expect to live in good health as opposed to the poor. And this is true, I mean, it is worse in the US and UK than most European countries. And it is an absolute outrage, to be quite honest. And it's one of the problems with the debate around raising the retirement age. So I've been in favour of raising the retirement age, and when I wrote my book, I looked at all this thing, and I thought, well, of course, we've all got to work longer, because actually it is crazy that some of us will have 30 years of not working. But there's going to come a point, if we don't get our populations healthier, there's going to come a point where there's a group of people with chronic comorbidities, chronic disease, who can't work longer. And I'm increasingly wondering if we're not going to have to sort of create some kind of dual system somehow, because the other risk, and this is true in the US, there's been some really good work on it, is the rich, and I mean, I'm using that loosely, but I mean, let's say the wealthiest 10 or 15%, are now likely to live so much longer than the poor that they are actually going to get more welfare benefits purely as a result of having lived longer than we're ever intended. And that's not what our welfare states were designed to create. So I just wondered what you thought. I mean, I just think, I almost feel like we have to kind of unpack this whole thing and start again, because otherwise we are going to be paying, I think, an awful lot of money to the wrong people, and not enough to the people who, unless we can do health prevention, which I'm separately passionate about, but I mean, people with chronic disease who are really in their 50s becoming quite ill.
So that you won't find much disagreement with any of that from me. Those differences, it was the point I made about state pension age increases being regressive. It's nearly a 10-year difference in life expectancy between the richest 10% and the poorest 10%, and it's nearly a 20-year difference in healthy life expectancy. So that poorest 10% are not only living 10-ish, less years, but they're living an extra decade in ill health during their shorter lives. That's just when you stratify the population of the UK into deciles, groups of 10. If you look down at the sort of medium-level super output areas, so groups of postcodes that are together, you start to see nearly a 30-year life expectancy difference between the richest and poorest, and again, larger gaps in healthy life expectancy. So, complete agreement there. It's 27 years, to be precise, between the highest and lowest MSOAs. So comparing sort of Richmond with, I think it's Bolton in the north of England.
Could be.
But Blackpool.
South.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And so it really is dramatic. A two-tier system becomes difficult. How do you stop people gaming the system? How do you prevent the rich from buying a flat in the most deprived part of the country, so that they, that those sorts of things would need to be thought through.
Well, you can do it
and navigated.
you can increase disability benefits, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, there's quite a lot of work being done on this in Austria as well. I mean, you can increase disability benefits and reduce universal benefits. I mean, I know that's not our sort of system, but I mean, I'm just, is that a part of the answer possibly?
I mean, the state pension can't be the answer to everything. And, I think we need to get away perhaps from having a sort of one-size-fits-all view that the state pension, is going to be the universal solution for everything and everyone. There's also a point about the private savings. So, if we are accumulating these defined contribution pots in workplace pensions, those can arguably, perhaps not for the very most deprived groups, but for the sort of bottom quartile, those can arguably be used in different ways in different groups. So the most affluent use it to supplement their state pension. The least affluent perhaps use it as a bridge until their state pension is available. Those would be alternatives that come to mind.
Thank you both very much. And my colleagues would never forgive me if I didn't give a shout out to the Commission on Health and Prosperity that we're currently just started IPPR. Is looking exactly at this set of questions. I think Camilla's speaking about it more tomorrow with some of my health colleagues. But it's looking at what a kind of preventative health model might do and how it kind of links into this wider set of challenges that we've just been describing. So my first question that links to what we've just been discussing would be what needs to change to ensure that we can all enjoy our later lives, and who is currently most at risk of missing out that we're overlooking in our policy debate? I'll go first to you, Joe.
Well, I've given a few thoughts to this, and for the elderly, it's the rate of change. Basically, because when I started work, I was on the board, I was drawing with a pencil, and when I finished, I was working on a CAD machine. I mean, over the range of 50 years or so, that's a general change. But really, from a pencil to an electronic machine, that's a hell of a gap. And I towards the end of my life, I must admit, I was struggling a bit towards it. But that might have been part of my problem. But then again, forget about that. Well, for the elderly, once again, it's the use of electronics. They're not used to it. I've tried to do it, and they say, well, it's logic. I say, well, it's logic for you to go down that way, but it's just as logical for me to go down that way. And they say, well, no, that's not right. I said, no, it's logical to me, so don't talk logic to me. Can I have an idiot board to follow? Nothing matter with an idiot board. It tells you where to get to in the easiest possible way. And because, it's the electronics once again with the shopping as well. The Queen's currency, who uses it now? Click.
Yeah.
The older ones don't like it because it allows them to know how to budget. They've got £40, and if they come back with £39.10, to quote Dickens, they're happy. If they come home without having to buy what they got, then they're not so happy.
Yeah, can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, John's absolutely right. The levels of digital exclusion in this country right now is deeply worrying. Millions of people who are excluded from functioning in certain parts of society because they're not digital natives or whatever you want to call them. And I was deeply worried when I read that there was some moving towards digital currencies in the treasury, and I just thought to myself, we are just asking for more problems down the road. It might sound good, but actually we need to think of the most vulnerable. I'd like to go back to the point I made earlier, which was that the challenge is the political environment we're in, bluntly. It makes it very difficult for us to do many radical things, and so if you're a person like me in number 10 and you recognise the political environment you're in, most of your focus will be on, okay, but what can we do within the confounds of this environment? So I guess the three things I would have been focused on, one is, of course, civil society, and you mentioned Macmillan nurses, and the question is, how can you expand, grow, encourage a bigger, dare I say it, Camilla, bigger society, because that ultimately is going to be the key to us trying to make progress within the environment that we're in. We do have to challenge Treasury orthodoxy. We have to be willing to say, well, actually, if you reduce investment in some areas, there are going to be longer lasting challenges, and you may just be preoccupied with the next election, but the right thing to do would be to be thinking about the challenges that future generations are going to face. And I suppose the other thing I would say is financial literacy is not just something that is beholden for the young people. I think there are a lot of people who are significantly older who still do not I don't understand a lot of things. I certainly don't understand my pension, to be honest. And so there's a need for us to invest in creative ways to educate people around how they can better plan for the future. So those are the things I probably would say.
And one kind of question our research is focused on is how we can better prepare people who are approaching later life to make sure that midlife, so 50 to 70, as is now kind of what we broadly think about as midlife rather than later life, how we can make sure that people's health is maintained through that period, and also they've got the skills that they need to kind of thrive in later life as well. Camilla, did you want to come in on that question of where there might be gaps?
So I think we need to be, I mean, I'd like to just strike a slightly positive note here, because we've been a bit doom and gloom, haven't we? I mean, when I wrote my book, I called it Extra Time, because I was really writing about the people who are in the bracket you've just talked about, in fact up to 80, who are still energetic and smart and totally capable. And when you're in Japan, they call them the young old, and you're not actually old in Japan until you're 80. You're really not. Geriatricians are not interested in you. I mean, excepting, if you're unlucky and you have a terrible condition, obviously. But on the whole, that we have seen a complete shift. But what we haven't changed is our attitude in society. And as a journalist for years, I mean, we've all done it. I mean, if you Google plucky pensioner, you will find stories from all over the world. Plucky pensioner, brackets 60, chased after burglar. Wow. I mean, it's really, our attitude in the media to older, in fact, people over 50 is really confusing.
Yeah.
We don't know how to
But
describe
isn't that the
them.
perspective of the reporter rather than society?
Well, I've done it myself. I mean, I don't,
Well,
yes,
you are,
but we're all part of...
you're looking for the headline, aren't you?
You are, but it does send. I think the signals we send. I think the signals sent by the media and by government, and actually by all of us, can have quite a profound effect. And in fact, the pension age is one of those things, because a lot of people I know who have got the bus pass are sort of like, God, I feel really guilty. I've got a free bus. I mean, so there's all of that going on, and actually, one of the weirdest things is that the labour market has not caught up with this. So, I mean, when I was looking at this, there's a guy, I mean, we're talking about digital savvy. A lot of people in their 50s and 60s and 70s are really digital savvy. I'm sorry, they are really good at this stuff. They are not hired by companies which think they can't do IT. That is not true anymore. I'm not saying you're not right, there are lots of people who can't. But I mean, the truth is this perception, old people, they can't learn new tricks, they can't do all the anything. And what neuroscience tells you is that actually we're learning new tricks all the time. If you look at what they were now discovering from strokes and from neuroscience breakthroughs, I mean, actually we're creating new neurons in our head all the time. And in fact, one of the chapters in my book, I went off and looked at various brain training things, most of which don't work, by the way, but some of which do. And in fact, doing crosswords does not work, apparently, because very clever people do crosswords. It's not because crosswords make you very clever. But there are things, there are genuine things you can do which are quite good for your brain. And we've just kind of got this perception of society that over 50, you can join Saga if you're over 50. And the supermarkets, I've spoken to supermarkets who don't segment their customer base over 50. So under 50 they have, 18 to 20, 21, over 50 just over 50. So, I mean, we're missing out commercially in this country because we're not even selling to people who, by the way, pre our early discussion, have most of the assets. And actually they have a lot of money to spend, and we're still not serving them. So I think to your question, Richard, I mean, we just need to kind of wake up and be much more ambitious for people in our healthcare system, in the way we write about people. I met a guy in New York who was 70 who'd come out of retirement to start a business which is basically he employs retired accountants like himself to help businesses because they couldn't get a job. I mean, that's happening all over the world. There are people who are like, actually, I know I want to go on working, but you can't. There is a problem with economic inactivity at the moment. It's really interesting why so many people have dropped out. I wrote a piece in the FT recently on this. Some people, I think, are ill. I think there is also ageism. I'm really sorry. A lot of people over 50 lost their job in America and Britain at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And even though we have a tight labour market, those people are telling us they have not been able to get back in because younger people sort of got rid of them, like, thank God, we don't want you back. And I'm not saying they're all brilliant, but I'm just saying we just have to change our view.
Absolutely. Stuart, do you want to come in on that question?
I'll just add a couple of thoughts. I think it's all been covered quite well. I think other than Camilla's book, perhaps the other relevant book on this subject of what needs to change is The 100-Year Life. And, just moving away from this very traditional linear model of education, work, retirement. As we've discussed here, different people will be ready for retirement at different ages. So we've all got very different prospects for kind of healthy life expectancy ahead of us. And there is a need to normalise retraining, reskilling, and changes. Not sticking to a single career. It may well be that we're able to retain more older people in the workforce if we've got more flexibility around what it means to be in the workforce. So, as I think developing those themes, which of course is easy to say for those of us that, I do have the kind of skills and education to easily retrain. Of course, there will be groups for whom that model won't work as well, and we do need to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm conscious of time, and we're planning to run until about 2:15, not 12:15. So I thought I'd open up to audience questions. That's your cue. Oh, lots of hands.
Right.
I was right in suspecting it might be the case. So I think we'll have a couple of roaming mics. So I'll go first of all to a woman in the blue at the front, and then there's two behind her. So with a stripy tie, and then glasses behind. Thank you.
Thank you, panel. It was a really, really interesting discussion. I was really interested to hear your point of view, and it's sort of coming through about individuals, really, about how do you take an individual approach, and there being a lack of individual approach at the moment. So I'd be really interested to hear your perspective. So what can we do to help people live their lives in a more individual way based on their own needs?
I'm with Anchor, which is a care and housing provider for older people. I was really struck by what Camilla said near the beginning, which was basically governments don't fix this. I think I'm paraphrasing, and that's I suppose quite depressing thought. And is there anything that can be done about that? How do we change that?
I'm always struck by how little anybody looking at this subject talks about the thing which is making my life an absolute misery and restricting my life to smaller and smaller areas. 3 years ago, because of various health issues, I became unable to use the computer. I'm now treated like a leper. I'm treated as if I've died, that I don't exist, I don't matter, and I can't do a whole range of things, from going to the cinema because they don't publish books anymore about what's on, to getting good saving accounts because they're internet only, to going to the London Food Festival because every contact was online. I'm treated worse than if I'd robbed a bank or bopped people over the head. I'm treated with no understanding, no sympathy, and your panel, you spoke about it briefly. You spoke about it as if it's easy to change. It isn't. 3 out of 10 people over 65 do not have digital access. That's about 3 million people.
Yeah, and all I was trying to say was we mustn't there's another problem, which is that people are routinely not offered jobs because
I wasn't talking
it's
about
assumed
that.
they can't do it.
I was talking about the fact that people over 65, the 3 million people who don't have digital access, the vast majority of them, including me, are people who cannot use the internet. They don't need a new machine, they don't need training. I am physically unable to. And I am treated in the most awful way. I fight every day of my life to be able to do things, whether it's with the bank, the building society, or whoever. I've been put in touch with Age UK are the best people to deal with this. And through them, I've been put in touch with the Equality Advisory Support Service, because I've just had a case I sent to them. They're an arbitration service where a large company has been deemed to have breached the Equality Act 2010 in my case, because they haven't made sufficient adjustments to people who have disabilities. And not being able to use the internet is defined as one. I have another case with them, and I'm lining them up. But nobody is taking this seriously. I was interviewed through Age UK by The Telegraph and by The Standard. The Telegraph spoke to me about this major issue of saving accounts, the best ones only being available online. And the Age UK published an article I gave them as a blog on their website, the title of which is, "I'm not dead, I'm just offline." Now, what do I want after that rant? It's not going to cost the government a lot of money. I want legislation to back up the Equalities Act to say that there must be an offline access opportunity available for every bank, every building society, every retailer. So I'm not stopping people using the internet. I'm just saying, please recognise that for some of us this is not an option, and make it possible for us to live a full life. I don't want any money. I don't want any help. I just want to be given the opportunity to have a life.
Bring back the telephone.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for an excellent set of questions. And it's a question, particularly on digital access, that we looked at back in 2019 around the transition to a cashless society that we knew was disproportionately excluding older people amongst a wider group of people that might not want to use digital finance.
I'm not talking cashless. I'm not
Yep.
talking using credit cards. I'm talking about online
Yeah.
access.
Online access to financial services. Yeah. Did you want to come in? Yeah.
Can I just say that I'm one of the people you've been talking about. I am 65 next month. I've had early onset Parkinson's for 35 years. And the service support doesn't include the fact that I'm living with it. The fact that I'm not beating it, but I'm still able to function. I've been living on my pension since I was retired 10 years ago. My wife has also been retired because she has MS. So we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place because we are both living off my pension. I'm now not pensionable till next year. So, things are over the next 12 months are going to get pretty dire for us. And there are more and more people like me. Parkinson's, the number of people with Parkinson's is growing. It's currently 2 people an hour are diagnosed with Parkinson's in this country. So what about us? I worked 35 years in public service. I think I've earned some support from the state. But the support I've had, so to date, has been from people like this sat next to me, who is from Parkinson's UK. We shouldn't be totally reliant on charities. I agree the systems need to change. I agree there is a need to help people transition. But like the lady over there, I have trouble with online access because I don't have the manual dexterity to keep things going all the time, or I hit the button and wipe everything out that I've just spent however many hours doing. And voice recognition systems don't work because our voices change in tone and pitch, and machines don't recognise them. So, sorry to increase the challenge, but there are lots of people like me, like yourself, sir, and like the lady over there, and we deserve a little respect when people are coming to the decisions about this for a whole country, because I know people in the States and that system doesn't work. When people are choosing between paying for food and paying for their meds, that doesn't work.
Thank you very much. Really excellent having your perspective. I'll go first to Camilla because I know you have to leave us a bit early.
I do. So look, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to say that Samuel was wrong about digital exclusion. You've just made the case very well. And actually, you've slightly opened my mind to something I hadn't quite thought about. I have to admit, I'm one of those people who hadn't really taken it that seriously, so thank you for doing that. Individual approaches. Yeah, I mean, this is the question, isn't it? So when I did this report for the government in 2020, I had gone back into the Department of Health in the pandemic because I'd been asked to help out. A lot of good that did. But I then, as a result, wrote a report about how can we lock in what we learned from the pandemic and how can we make the social care system better. And really my bottom line was we have to start commissioning for outcomes for individuals. And the problem is, you'll know this. I mean, it sounds impossible from a government. So you sit in the heart of government and you think it's just absolutely... And the first thing you think in government is, if we ask people what they want, they're going to want everything. And that's what they said. They think they're going to want a wheelchair, they're going to want that. Now, people tell me, and there are some good examples of this, that doesn't happen. Because actually a lot of people say, what I really want is a cup of tea with someone that I can talk to. I mean, that is what happened. People want relationships. Yeah. Yes, they might want some equipment, but if you gave them a choice, they actually want a relationship, which very often they don't get. I spent months of my life trying to get 2 sets of carers to let my aunt go on seeing her best friend. I cannot tell you. Both of these women paid for privately, both had some form of dementia. The rotors, the shit didn't work. That's it wasn't anybody's particular fault, but there was no desire to do that because that wasn't really important. What was important was had they got washed and had they got dressed and had they ticked off the charts. So I do actually think fundamental to this is that we change the tick boxes that we have. And I don't actually think it's impossible. And there are parts of, there's a brilliant place in Wales which has begun to do it. There are some councils around which have started to say, let's reverse the thing and let's ask people what they want. And I think, anyway, I'm evangelical about that because I actually think it can work, but the problem is it is scary as hell if you're sitting in government and you've got a limited budget. Yeah. And the other point was about what I said about governments don't fix it. I mean, I've just become quite cynical. I've been in and around government for years. I'm not just talking about the one government I worked for. What I saw when I went and interviewed people about how they are redefining age for themselves, how they are building their own communities, how they're building cooperative housing, how they're building relationships between the generations, was very often they're doing that ahead of government or even in spite of government. And I just think governments only move as fast as public opinion moves. They really can't move ahead of that. And very often they're just not very innovative. So I'm sorry if it sounded like a council of despair. It wasn't. But I just think we can't wait for government to solve these problems. That's what I think. And I just think we need to empower people to take hold of these problems themselves. Because if we wait for government, we could be waiting an awful long time.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? I mean, some of the people who I rely on the most in my life for wisdom are folks who are retired, who I can trust, who are discreet, who have significant life experience. And I kind of feel like it is not just an elderly person that is missing out when they are not embraced as part of our social fabric. It's the whole of society that misses out. And unfortunately, it is members of the elderly whose health also suffers as a result of our negligence, bluntly. And so the challenge for us is, how do we create a cultural shift that is both large enough to make an impact and significant enough to be sustained? And why I say to be sustained is because there are many examples of us being able to galvanize tens of thousands of volunteers. The 2012 Olympics, COVID-19, we had tens of thousands of people, sign up to volunteer. What we did with them is a question for another day. So we're able to inspire people to want to invest in their communities, but we're just not able to. We haven't been able to sustain it. Again, 2010, that was part of, David Cameron's vision. The challenge with that was, of course, the period within which, when it was announced, made some people very skeptical. But to be honest with you, that big idea was the right idea. It was an idea where the state said, we're going to play a part, we're going to use dormant asset funds, we're going to make sure that we can invest more in our social fabric, but you have to meet us as well halfway. And that's where we need to get to. Are we going to get there in the next 2 years? If I was a betting man, probably wouldn't put money on it. Can we get there? Yes, I certainly believe we can. And I'm folks like Camilla and myself, I know, are definitely committed to playing our part.
Thank you. Stuart or John, did you want to come in on any of those?
Only very briefly. I think on the individual point, it touches on something we discussed earlier about age generally being a pretty poor proxy for somebody's individual needs, health and circumstances. And I think we default to it because it's kind of easy and it feels objective, but actually it isn't really objective. At macro level, the rich and the poor are aging at different speeds, and then we've had a couple of examples in the room of people who've sort of had unfortunate diagnoses in their lives that mean that they're needing more support at a younger stage. The digital exclusion point is an important one, and perhaps institutions, financial services, governments and so on may have taken a view, or too much of a view at times, that this is a problem you can sort of wait out, that the generation that generation are less familiar won't be with us forever. But I think the truth is that there will always be individuals who become digitally excluded, that haven't been digitally excluded through their lives. So we do need a long-term solution there.
The real problem is the outlook of society. We've allowed people to say old people don't care. We're the only generation really that has this outlook. You look back in history, people who lived long were respected. They're because they'd experienced things, so people look to them for solutions. They don't now. We've allowed them to say, doesn't matter, we've got a machine that can do it, or we've got something else that can do it, we don't need you. Or they're too, either that or we let them be too ambitious.
Thank you, John. Yes, yeah, that's good.
An answer to everything.
So thanks very much to Camilla, who's got to head off to another event for 2, so just on time. And I'll go to another round of questions. I think we had Emily there, here, and then one at the back, and we'll take all of you before we close.
Thank you very much. I'm Emily Holzhausen from Carriage UK. Sorry, my voice has just suddenly gone funny. It's something Camilla just touched on a little bit, and you did, Stuart, and Samuel, you did in a slightly way. And that is the workplaces that we need for now and for the future to sustain a supportive ageing population where people can work longer with conditions and disabilities. And from my perspective, working for Carers UK, is the ability of people to juggle work and care for their relatives for as long as possible. Now, there's a really clear link between disability and poverty and lower savings and retirement, which I know, some of you financial guys have made great submissions for the State Pensions Review. So it's really, that's where you start to see the diversity as well in healthy living expectancy. So healthy life expectancy, beg your pardon. So how can what kind of workplaces do you see are right for now for this ageing population? And what role can social care play, for example, where we've invested in childcare to understand that women particularly, but also men, can juggle work and care? How can we see this as a help meet so that people can work for longer? That includes disabled people who need social care as well. Sorry, it's a long question.
That's right, thank you. I think we're going to the man in stretcher here. Yeah.
Yes, I've actually almost forgotten what I was going to say. I should admit I'm an actuary, like the guy there. There's not many of us, but as he said.
An admission.
But the point that Stuart made, I think, is a very big one. The fact that the system is not now encouraging people to save enough for their pensions. The sort of the nest scheme or workplace pensions, everyone going into defined contribution rather than final salary, it ripped the contribution rates in defined contribution are roughly half what they need to be to get a decent pension. And I just think it's quite, the final pension schemes just disappeared because of change in accounting rules. And most people have no idea. All they suddenly thought was, hey, I only have to pay this 2% into my pension, not 5%. I'm a winner. And of course the reality is that in the long term, you're a massive loser. So there was that big problem, and that actually leads on to the other thing that was raised. So I don't know if you've got any views, how the hell are we going to reinstate something closer to a final salary, maybe an average career average type thing. But we need to be pushing someone somewhere to understand, and we need to educate people to understand they're not saving enough, because otherwise we will have an evolving disaster as we all retire. I'm actually 78 and I still lecture at university, so you can do it. But yeah, so I'll leave. I had a few other things to say, but
Right.
Well, the only thing that can happen really is it's got to come from central government. You can get it into private companies, but they won't cooperate with one another. So it's got to come from central government, and they turn around and say everybody has to do it. I mean, you don't mind doing something if everybody's in the same boat. You know, if people can pick and choose, you know, it falls apart.
But final salary schemes used to be run by companies,
Yeah.
and they, you know, they got frightened by the accounting, the volatility, and the balance sheets, and they would say they were very happy. So it's very happy to say we'll close that, we'll set up something which takes us less money, is less risk.
We'll put the
and
responsibility
so you
on the
put it
government.
back, and you have to have, you really have to say, the corporate sector has to, as happened in the 70s, they were all told they really had to put in final salary schemes. You have to go back and say you've got to do that.
It throws it back on every responsibility comes back to political responsibility. So if the companies can't do it, throw it back on the government and say, we want this, you're the government, you do it.
I don't think.
Well, I think we're going to go to a question in the green here, and then we'll come back with all those questions.
Actually, thanks for that. Just actually follow on from that point about you saying that encouraging people to invest more in the pension and to put that confidence and that faith in our institutions to provide for us in our old age. Now, this time last week, 90% of UK pension funds are on the brink of insolvency.
Yeah.
This was only averted by the Bank of England magicking £65 billion of monopoly money out of thin air and injecting it into the markets. I'd like to know what the panel's sort of view on that is. Why has that happened? My understanding is that the pension funds are investing in financial derivatives and using leverage in order to make their payments on their liabilities. And the question is, why are they doing that? Is that another case of greedy bankers, or is there a fundamental structural reason why the pension funds are forced to take risks with our retirement fund, basically? And is that structural?
Thank you. I had one more question at the back, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. My name's Morgan. I work for an older people's charity called Independent Age. As you can imagine, we're getting a lot of calls at the moment, people telling us they're not going to put the heating on for the rest of the year, going to bed early to stay warm, turning the lights off, turning the fridge off overnight. They're just some examples. And I think that group of 2 million older people living below the poverty line is often forgotten, many of whom might be entitled to benefits, but as Samuel mentioned earlier, have taken time out to care for friends or relatives and now don't qualify for the full state pension and don't get the benefits they're entitled to. So, you know, if somebody is healthy and willing and able to care for a relative, then I've got all the admiration in the world. But if they then don't receive their full state pension and are living in poverty in later life, I think we need to do something about it. So I'd like to hear what the panel think about benefit entitlement and making sure people in later life know what they're entitled to and receive it.
Thank you again for an excellent set of questions. Just to repeat for the benefit of the panel, we had one on what kind of workplaces we need to make sure people can juggle work and care later into their lives, and what role for social care in that picture. One on saving incentives, and that linked quite nicely into our last question around the lack of qualification for state pension, both quite gendered issues that we know disproportionately affect women who are likely to earn less, care more, and find themselves in greater financial precarity in later life. And then I'm glad we got onto the question of pensions on the brink of insolvency last week, and the panel's take on that one too. Who would like to go first?
I see you're looking at me.
You did look away.
Okay, a very diverse group of questions and some tricky ones. Workplaces of the future. I guess it's been really interesting to see some of the sort of corollaries of the shift to working from home that happened during the pandemic. So one thing we saw is far fewer people going into care, for example. Now, partly that's going to be perhaps fear-driven. When we had the great tragedy of the care homes and 1 in 7 residents dying of COVID in that early wave. But actually, partly it's a greater ability of families to care for people at home. The same applies with the reduction in end-of-life care at hospitals. As has been referred to, we need to be aware of those kind of gendered expectations that might arise there. It's all very well to say, we can now care for children and people who are older and infirm at home, but if that's all falling on one partner, then that could be problematic for career progression. We need to be aware, obviously, with the shift to working from home, of the digital exclusion point that we talked about earlier. And so there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all, but I think we're going to see a period of kind of trial and experimentation across different employers in the years ahead. moving on to pensions. Yes, fundamentally, we've had a big decline in DB and a move to so that's defined benefit and a move to defined contributions. Without getting bogged down in the technicalities of the different types of pensions, fundamentally, if people are putting less in, they're going to get less out. If we're going to be living as long in retirement as we spent in saving, crudely, for every £1 you have today, you need to put £1 away for tomorrow, and nobody's doing anything like that.
Can I say because we're paying the bills?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not naive to the challenges that we're all facing in terms of today's expenditure.
Decisions being made because less has been paid and paid out. Private pension companies are taking the view that they'll gamble, use leverage in order to carry on paying out that higher rate that everybody's accustomed to.
So
the problem with that is that when there's a black swan event, they're insolvent.
I would disagree a little. Yeah, I suspect for the interest of most in the room, we don't want to get too far into technicalities of different types of pension schemes. But essentially what you're talking about there, sir, is liability-driven investment, which is predominantly about hedging risk. It's actually a direction that applies for the older style of pensions, the ones that we're saying have been largely phased out. Defined benefit contributions, and they've largely tried to hedge themselves to ensure that they are protected against small movements in interest rates, and then when something extreme happens, it causes problems. But this isn't them speculating, it's not them gambling, and importantly, it doesn't apply to the sort of defined contribution pots, which the majority of people are saving into for within auto-enrolment. And then, lastly on carers, that heating or eating kind of important question. I just very briefly, I think the important work that carers do needs to be recognised, and they shouldn't be losing out on benefits as a result.
I just got a quick bit in. I think the big problem in this pension fund thing of last week was that I'm not a fan. I'm a trustee of the pension scheme. I'm glad we don't use any of these LDI things. But the real issue is that the pension funds who are using them assumed that the 30-year gilt was a liquid instrument. The trouble is, over the last 10 years, the only buyers of 30-year gilt have been the Bank of England and the pension funds. The Bank of England has stopped buying. The pension funds needed to sell something. There were no buyers, so the price goes down straight away. So you actually got a much bigger move in interest rates than you should have done. And obviously, when the Bank of England came back in to support it, and the interest rates have gone down again, there's still an issue because I've been writing my consulting actually for our pension fund because I want to know exactly what damage it would have done overall. It doesn't fund anything to our pension.
We haven't got a free market, have we? Effectively, the Bank of England are buying up.
Well, they're not. They've stopped buying.
The Bank of England's the market.
The Bank of England is the market, so the
well, it
free
was. That's it.
Bust. That's because the market for pension is bust.
Yeah.
Well,
look at the practicalities, not the theory. Look at the practicalities, not the theory.
Okay.
That's where I
think I'm just going to move us on, just for the benefit of.
This gets very complicated. We need to do lines on the thing about generation.
Yeah, exactly. Just to save us from a full pension seminar.
Population, you have more people drawing out than you people paying in, so structurally that doesn't work, does it?
Thank you.
And the question is, do you use leverage to gamble, or do you say you're not going to pay out as much?
I think we're going to draw this to a close, and you can take out outside afterwards for a full IFOA discussion, I'm sure. Samuel, did you want to come in? Any
no, I think I would just be repeating what Stuart said, or triggering more people.
And John, did you want to come in?
Way above my pay grade.
Excellent. Do we have any further questions? Great, thank you.
I was just.
Oh wait, well, we'll get the mic to you.
On the point you were making around the sort of risk transfer from DB to DC, by the way, I work at BlackRock UK, I'm the retirement lead there. So what I was wondering was, do you think there's a role for employers to be a bit more paternalistic in terms of some of the points that you're making around financial education, financial resilience, because obviously the liabilities that they have now are so much less than what they had before. Also, they're putting in a lot less money. So I was just interested in what you think about employers, and also, sorry, just a final point, I guess people trust their employers in a way that they don't trust, other institutions. So I just wondered, had you been thinking about that, or what more employers could kind of do to support people?
And I'd perhaps add to that question the challenge of growing self-employment and what that means for pension security. I know I personally tear my hair out with lots of members of my family who aren't interested in talking about the value of a good pension for increasingly self-employed. We'll go to you first, Stuart.
We've just made an already great question a lot harder. To deal with the traditional employers first, so I would absolutely agree that there is a significant role for employers to provide both financial and non-financial advice and guidance, if we want to split hairs about the difference, to their employees throughout their careers, and in particular once they sort of get to sort of 50 plus and start thinking about retirement and what that might mean for them, or when realistically they could go. There are, of course, other options. Again, I don't want to spend ages on technical questions around pension types, but there is a middle ground between the sort of final salary traditional, which was essentially brought down by how extremely expensive a lot of the guarantees that they were required to make were, and this new kind of more flexible defined contribution. So Royal Mail at the moment are exploring a sort of middle ground where they sort of aspire to pay a defined benefit, but without all the guarantees that are in there. So that's working its way through kind of legislation at the moment. So there are different routes being explored. And then on the self-employment point, there's clearly a role for bodies like Citizens Advice Bureau and other kind of well-known, well-established groups. We needn't keep reinventing the wheel in terms of where we point people to for financial advice and guidance.
Yeah, I'd just say, yeah, totally. Particularly larger employers. I know that we used to have a Financial Inclusion Council, which I think is now defunct. And I didn't know it was defunct when I was at number 10 because I didn't know it existed until I left. So, or I would have undefunked it. So I think large employers have a really important role to play. There are challenges around small employers who have, I guess less bandwidth to be able to do some of that work. Certainly a big worry should be people who are self-employed, who are not paying in, etc., etc. And I suppose I don't know, again, how that circle is going to be squared as we move towards a country with lower regulation, lower levers to pull, and it goes back to what began in 2010 and has since been forgotten about. It's probably going to be the best way forward. But yeah, I think personally I'm very worried. I think this subject is not being spoken about enough, and we need to find ways to resource this subject, not just with money but with intellectual capacity and more people willing to own this subject across the political divide and beyond.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're out of time. After we finished at 2:15. Unless it's an incredibly swift question.
Well, I just want to add a comment. You can't. Employers' interests are not the same as employees. We have had situations where, quite genuinely, employees have invested their funds in employers who've then gone bust at the expense of the employees.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for a really lively set of questions and for engaging with a very broad-based discussion this afternoon. Really fantastic to have you all, and thank you to our fantastic panel for your expertise and your time.